I was going through this story when one detail stopped me cold. Not the betrayal itself, but the weapon chosen against it. The protagonist does not confront anyone. She simply walks into a testing center and registers for 17 credit examinations at once, right here on Eternal Diary. The smell that pulled Lin Yun back to consciousness was antiseptic. Not the clean, clinical antiseptic of a well-funded hospital. This was the cheap kind. The kind that sits in a plastic bottle under a utility sink and gets diluted 3 times before anyone mops with it, leaving floors that smell like a chemical attempt at cleanliness rather than cleanliness itself. It clung to the inside of her nose and sat there, flat and insistent, the way bad news does before you've fully processed it. She did not open her eyes immediately. This was a habit she had developed over the last 4 years of her previous life, the discipline of lying still before committing to wakefulness. When you are 36 years old and sleeping on a pull-out cot in a shared office space because your apartment lease was allowed to expire while you were in the hospital, you learn to breathe first, orient second, open your eyes third. The world announces itself too loudly if you rush it. But the antiseptic was wrong. She had not smelled that specific diluted antiseptic in years. The clinic near her childhood home, the one on Redmond Road with the flickering light above the reception desk that maintenance had promised to fix every spring since 2003, that clinic had used exactly this formula. She would know it anywhere. She had spent 17 Saturdays in that waiting room during the year she was preparing for the Gaokao. And getting the vitamin B12 injections her mother had convinced herself would improve Lin Yun's concentration. They had not improved Lin Yun's concentration, but the smell had embedded itself somewhere deep and specific in her memory, the way only very particular sensory experiences do when they accompany significant stress. She opened her eyes. The ceiling above her was pale green, not the institutional white of a modern hospital or the gray of the office ceiling she had woken to most recently. Oh, pale green, with a water stain in the far left corner shaped approximately like the province of Yunnan. She had stared at that stain for hours at a time across 18 years of sleeping in this room. She knew its borders the way cartographers know disputed territories, with absolute intimacy and a small, persistent uncertainty about the edges. She was in her childhood bedroom. Lin Yun sat up slowly, the way a person sits up when they are not certain the world they are perceiving is real and are unwilling to startle it into revealing itself as otherwise. The mattress beneath her was the old one, the one with the slight depression on the left side where the springs had gradually surrendered. The desk against the wall held her textbooks, her pencil cup, a half-finished cup of cold tea. On the cover of the textbook on top of the stack, the red mathematics review volume, she could read the year printed in the bottom right corner. She read it twice. Then, she set both feet flat on the floor, pressed her palms to her thighs, and counted her own heartbeats for 30 seconds. She was 17 years old. It was the 14th of April, 6 weeks before the Gaokao. Lin Yun stood up, crossed to the small mirror above her desk, and looked at herself for a long time. The face that looked back was round in the cheeks where it would later sharpen. There were no lines at the corners of her eyes. Her hair was longer than she had worn it at any point after 22. She was wearing the faded yellow sleep shirt with the cartoon panda that she had kept until it disintegrated sometime during her 24th year. She had died at 36. She knew this with the same flat certainty with which she knew the water stain's shape and the mattress spring's location. She had died in a hospital room. Not this clinic, but a real hospital, the kind with proper antiseptic. From a complication following surgery for a condition that had gone undiagnosed for too long because she had not had comprehensive health insurance and had been managing the symptoms with over-the-counter medications for 14 months. The last thing she had been aware of, with any clarity, was the particular sound the cardiac monitor made when its readings changed. A long, deliberate tone. Not a beeping, not an alarm, just a tone, the way a tuning fork sounds when you hold it near something resonant. And then this room, this ceiling, this mattress, this smell. Lin Yun looked at her 17-year-old face for another full minute. Then she sat back down at the desk, moved the cold tea to the side, and opened the mathematics textbook to chapter 7. She had work to do. The thing about being reborn with 19 years of additional lived experience is that the experience does not arrive organized. It does not present itself as a clean archive with properly labeled folders. It arrives the way a library arrives when someone has thrown all the books down a staircase Everything is present, but you have to do the work of resorting it yourself. And the process of resorting is not linear. Lin Yan spent the first 3 days after her return doing exactly this. She slept a normal amount, ate meals at the table with her family, said the things that 17-year-old Lin Yan would have said, and used every remaining hour doing internal inventory. She knew, for instance, with absolute precision that the Gaokao was 6 weeks away, and that in her original timeline, she had scored a 598. She knew this number not because it was triumphant, but because it had haunted her for 19 years. A 598 out of 750 had landed her at Donghae University, a solid institution, but not the one she had been aiming for, not the one where Shuming taught corporate law, and where if you performed well enough in your first 2 years, you could petition to accelerate your remaining coursework. A 598 had sent her down a particular path. A different score would have sent her down a different one. She also knew why she had scored a 598 when she had been scoring in the high 660s during every practice examination. The textbooks. The specific, deliberate, sweetly executed removal of her textbooks. Her sister Wei Yan was 2 years younger than her. At 15, Wei Yan had a face designed for trust. Wide-set eyes, a small mouth that seemed perpetually on the verge of apology. A hair she kept in 2 braids until she was 16, and then cut into a bob that made her look suddenly sophisticated and still somehow innocent. Wei Yan was the kind of person who could borrow something and return it damaged and leave the exchange feeling inexplicably like you were the one who owed her an apology. 3 weeks before the Gaokao, Wei Yan had knocked on Lin Yan's bedroom door with a specific expression, the one Lin Yan had been too young then to fully decode, and asked to borrow 3 volumes: the Advanced Mathematics Review Book, the Chemistry Problems Compilation, the English Reading Comprehension Practice set with the annotated solutions that Lin Yan had spent 40 hours working through. The stated reason had been that Wei Yan's school was doing early university preparation for high-achieving third-year students, and her teacher had assigned supplementary work. The actual reason, which Lin Yan had not understood until she was 29 years old, sitting in a night school classroom waiting for a corporate law lecture to begin, and had suddenly, with the specific clarity that only retrospect provides, understood, was that Wei Yan had known exactly what she was taking. Wei Yan had been watching Lin Yan study for 8 months. She had seen which books Lin Yan reached for first, which pages had the most annotations, so which sections had sticky notes in 3 colors. She had calculated, with the kind of lateral intelligence that does not show up on standardized tests, that removing those specific 3 volumes in the final 3 weeks would create a gap Lin Yan could not adequately repair with time. She had been correct. Lin Yan had asked for the books back 4 times. Each time, Wei Yan had produced a variation of the same response. She was in the middle of a section, she would return them by the weekend. So she was so sorry she knew how important they were. She had tried to be so careful. Each request and each response had taken place in front of their mother. Their mother had on each occasion placed a gentle hand on Lin Yan's arm and said something to the effect of giving your sister a little more time. You've been studying so hard, you know so much already. The books came back the evening before the first exam day. Some pages had been folded. The English annotation key had a water ring on the cover from a glass set on it. The damage was not significant enough to report and not insignificant enough to ignore, and Lin Yan had sat with those 3 volumes for 6 hours the night before the exam, trying to compress 3 weeks of missed review into one frantic night. A 598. Sitting at her desk in the pre-dawn quiet of the 14th of April, 19 years behind her and all of it sorted and filed. Lin Yan opened the Mathematics Review volume and began to read. She read with the focused calm of someone who already knows the answers and is simply reminding herself where she put them. On the 19th of April, 5 days after Lin Yan's return, Wei Yan knocked on the bedroom door. Lin Yan had been expecting this. In her original timeline, the knock had come on the 21st. She had moved the chess pieces slightly by being more visibly absorbed in her work in the evenings. Sitting at the desk with the desk lamp on, the review book spread wide, making small notes in the margins with the mechanical pencil she kept sharpened to a consistent fine point. It was a deliberate performance of availability, a kind of lure. Wei Yan opened the door after her knock without waiting for an invitation. This, too, was a reliable behavior. She was wearing her school uniform. Her braids slightly loose on the left side. her expression already assembled into the particular configuration Lin Yan now recognized as her pre-request face. Open, slightly anxious, projecting a vulnerability that made refusal feel like an act of aggression. "Gee," Wei Yan said, using the elder sister address. "I'm sorry to interrupt. Are you in the middle of something important? Practice problems," Lin Yan said without looking up from the page. "Chemistry." "Right, of course." A pause, in which Wei Yan would be recalibrating against Lin Yan's failure to immediately offer her full attention. "My teacher assigned some extra preparation work this week for the university track students." Another pause. "I was wondering if I could borrow a few of your review books." Lin Yan let 3 seconds pass. She turned one more page. "Which ones?" "The Advanced Mathematics Review. And maybe the Chemistry Problems book, the one with the practice solutions. And if you're not using it right now, the English reading." "No." The word landed in the room with very little drama. Lin Yan had said it the way you say a fact, not the way you say a refusal. No tension in it, no apology around it. Just the word itself. Flat and complete. Wei Yan was quiet for a moment that was longer than the pause she used for minor recalibrations. This was the pause for a more significant recalculation. "I would return them very quickly," she said. "Oh, I know how important—" "The exam is 5 weeks away," Lin Yan said. She turned another page. "I'm using all 3 of those books every day. I'm not lending them." "I just need them for a week." "Wei Yan." Lin Yan set down her pencil. She turned to face her sister, and she looked at her for a moment with an expression that was neither unkind nor warm. It was the expression of a person completing an assessment. "I'm not going to lend them, and if your teacher assigns supplementary university prep work, your school library has reference copies. You can photocopy what you need." The silence in the room had a texture. It was not the silence of someone processing a reasonable refusal. It was the silence of a particular strategy failing in real time. The kind of silence that has frustration buried inside it that it cannot yet afford to show. "Fine," Wei Yan said. Her voice adjusted to something softer, something almost hurt. "I understand." She closed the door. Lin Yan turned back to her chemistry problems and worked through the next 40 minutes with the steady, unhurried focus of someone whose hands are not shaking. They were not shaking. That surprised her slightly. She had expected some residual feeling, some echo of the original anger or grief, or the helpless frustration of 19 years younger Lin Yan, who had not known what was being done to her. But what she felt instead was something closer to the sensation of walking a familiar road in daylight rather than dark. She knew where the uneven stones were. She stepped around them without drama. Her score on the practice examination she completed that evening was 681. The Gaokao happened across 2 days in the first week of June. Lin Yan took both days with the methodical composure of someone completing a task they have done before, which was not precisely what had happened, but was close enough to operate correctly. The examination questions were familiar, not because she had seen them. The specific questions changed each year, but because she had spent 19 additional years thinking in the patterns these questions tested, and those patterns were now as natural to her as breathing. She finished each section with time to spare, reviewed her answers twice, and left each examination room with the specific emptiness of a person who has executed a plan correctly and is now simply waiting for the confirmation. Her mother met her outside the examination center on the second afternoon with a thermos of barley water and a container of cold noodles. Wei Yan was not there. She had claimed via a text message that arrived at 11 a.m. that she had a study group she could not skip. Their mother had apologized for this on Wei Yan's behalf, as was her habit, and Lin Yan had accepted the apology with a nod and no particular feeling about it. "How do you think it went?" her mother asked, unscrewing the thermos lid. "Well," Lin Yan said. Her mother looked at her with the slightly uncertain expression she had always worn when Lin Yan said something definitive. "Really? Not too difficult?" "Not too difficult." She accepted the thermos and drank the barley water, which was warm and slightly too sweet the way her mother always made it. She's standing in the concrete shade outside the examination center with her empty pencil case in her bag. Around her, other students were processing in the various ways students process the end of a thing that has defined their entire existence for the last year, some of them crying, some of them photographing their last answer sheets before handing them in. one boy sitting on the curb 10 meters away with his head dropped to his knees. Lin Yan finished the barley water, capped the thermos, and ate half the cold noodles while she waited for her mother to retrieve the car from the parking structure. They were made with the sesame paste she preferred, and they were good. And she ate them with the unhurried attention she gave to things that were genuinely good. 6 weeks later, her score was posted. 706. She sat with that number for approximately 45 seconds. In the kitchen, she could hear her mother on the phone. The cadence of someone relaying information to someone else. Oh no, the tone rising and then getting complicated in a way that suggested the information was meeting an unexpected response on the other end. Through the thin wall, Wei Yan's room was quiet, with the specific quality of quiet that is not actually quiet, but is rather silence being enforced deliberately. Lin Yan closed the score portal, opened a different browser window, and began researching the credit by examination policies of Peking University's law faculty. She had known for 3 years, for 3 of her previous years, the one she had spent at night school while working as a paralegal at a small firm that handled commercial tenancy disputes, that Peking University's law program had a provision in its academic handbook that almost no one used. A student who could demonstrate mastery of a course's core competencies through an independently administered examination could receive full credit for that course without attending the formal instruction. The provision had been written in 1987 and never substantially amended. It required the approval of the relevant department head, a passing score of 90 or above on the administered examination, and a written petition submitted during the first 2 weeks of the academic year. The provision was buried in Section 14 of the Academic Handbook, subsection C, under a heading that read, Alternative Credit Assessment Mechanisms. The subsection was 4 paragraphs long. Most students who stumbled across it assumed it was a relic from before the university had standardized its curriculum and was not actually available in practice. It was actually available in practice. Lin Yan knew this because a professor named Huang Wei, a 63-year-old property law specialist who had a reputation for being exacting and a secondary reputation for being surprisingly generous to students who came to him directly rather than through bureaucratic channels, had approved 17 such petitions over the course of his 30-year tenure, and the approvals were part of the public academic record. She had read those records during her night school years. With the specific and slightly wistful attention of someone looking at a door they cannot use. She was going to use it now. Peking University's law faculty was a different environment than Donghai's. Lin Yan had spent 4 years at Donghai in her original timeline, 4 years that had felt, from the inside, like 4 years of running slightly behind, of being perpetually one step removed from the resources that would have made a genuine difference. Donghai was solid. The Donghai produced capable lawyers who went on to competent careers. But its networks were smaller, and its clinical program was underfunded, and the adjunct who taught advanced corporate law in the 3rd year was primarily focused on maintaining his consulting practice and taught from notes that had not been updated since 2008. Peking University's law faculty had Xu Ming. Xu Ming was the reason Lin Yan had identified this institution as the destination. So she had encountered his work, first the papers, then the book on variable interest entity structures in Chinese corporate law, then the secondary literature about him. During her late 20s, when she had been trying to understand the mechanism by which her father's company had been systematically dismantled and absorbed by a competitor in a transaction that had been, on its face, completely legal, she had spent a year trying to understand what had happened. Xu Ming's writing had explained it to her with a clinical precision that felt, reading it at the time, like being told the name of an illness you have been suffering from without diagnosis. He was 51 years old in this year, which meant he was in the most productive period of his career. He taught 3 courses in the undergraduate program, Foundations of Corporate Law, Advanced Securities Regulation, and a seminar he offered to selected students titled Structural Vulnerabilities in Closely Held Company Governance. And he supervised 4 doctoral students and maintained a practice advising 3 major institutional investors. He was also, according to his department page, the head of the law department's credit examination committee. The petitions she submitted in the first 2 weeks of her first academic year were 17 in number, covering the full course catalog for years 1 and 2 of the standard curriculum in areas where she had sufficient pre-existing knowledge to pass a 90-plus examination: contract law, tort law, civil procedure, constitutional law, legal research methodology, legal writing, introduction to property law, administrative law, criminal law and procedure, evidence, comparative legal systems, jurisprudence, Chinese judicial history, international private law, legal ethics, foundations of corporate law, just in commercial transactions. She submitted them in person rather than through the department administrative system, because submitting them in person required going to the law office and speaking to the administrative assistant, who looked at the stack of petitions with an expression that cycled through several stages before landing on something that was part bewilderment and part professional concern. You want to petition for credit in 17 courses? Well, all at once? That's correct. You're a first-year student. Yes. These 17 courses represent the entire first and second year curriculum, with the exception of the legal clinic practicum and the moot court requirement, which I understand cannot be satisfied by examination. I intend to complete those in the normal time frame. The administrative assistant, a woman in her mid-40s who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and who had clearly been managing this office long enough to have seen most things, but apparently not this particular thing, looked at the stack of petitions for another moment. "I'll need to pass these to Professor Huang's office for review," she said. "I understand. Thank you." She left the office and went to the campus cafeteria, where she ate a bowl of congee with preserved egg and shredded pork that cost 4 yuan and 50 cents and was better than she had expected. The cafeteria was large and echoing in the way that university cafeterias are at the beginning of semesters, with the specific social noise of people who don't know each other yet performing the negotiations of potential friendship. She ate her congee without speaking to anyone. She read 40 pages of Shuming's book on variable interest entity structures. She had bought it on the first day and was already halfway through, and left when she was done. Huang Wei summoned her to his office 6 days later. He was a compact man with reading glasses pushed to the top of his head and a desk covered in a specific kind of scholarly disorder that gives the impression of organization imposing itself on chaos rather than the reverse. He looked at her for a long moment when she sat down across from him, the stack of her petitions in front of him with his handwritten notations in the margins. "You understand," he said, "that the credit by examination provision exists primarily for transfer students and for students who have completed equivalent coursework at accredited institutions? I understand that that is its primary use historically," Lin Yan said. "I also understand that the provision as written does not restrict eligibility to transfer students and does not require equivalent prior coursework. The requirement is demonstrated mastery through examination." Huang Wei looked at her over his glasses. He had a look that Lin Yan suspected he had developed over 30 years of teaching, a look that was part assessment and part patience and part the specific interest that a person who genuinely loves a subject develops for anyone who approaches it with seriousness. "Where did you learn to read academic policy language like a statute?" he said. "I read a great deal," Lin Yan said. 17 courses. If I approve the examinations and you score 90 or above on all 17, you will have satisfied 2 full years of curriculum requirements before your first semester ends. Yes. If you pass all 17, you could theoretically complete the remaining curriculum, the 3rd and 4th year courses, in a single calendar year if you petition for credit in the remaining examinable courses and petition for early graduation. I intend to do that." Huang Wei was quiet for a moment. He picked up the top petition, reviewed a notation he had made in the margin. Set it down. "Tell me about your understanding of the foundations of corporate law," he said. "Specifically, the theoretical framework for piercing the corporate veil," Lin Yan told him. She told him for 12 minutes, without notes, covering the statutory basis, the dominant judicial tests, the academic debate between entity theory and aggregate theory proponents, the specific factual patterns that courts had historically found sufficient to justify veil piercing, and the limitations of the doctrine as applied to multi-tiered holding structures. She covered a secondary point about the tension between certainty and equity in its application that she had first encountered in Shuming's early work, and had spent several years thinking about in the context of actual cases. Huang Wei was quiet for a moment after she finished. "Come back on Thursday," he said. "The examination for foundations of corporate law will be at 2 o'clock. If you pass, I'll schedule the remaining 16. She passed all 17. The scores ranged from a low of 93 in Chinese judicial history, a subject whose factual content she was well versed in, but whose specific academic framing she had to reconstruct from her memory of secondary sources, to a high of 99 in advanced contract law. The average was 96.2, which Huang Wei noted without particular expression was the highest average across a multi-course credit petition in the department's recorded history. He approved her petition for the remaining curriculum. She submitted course enrollment requests for the 3rd and 4th year courses, which provoked a second conversation with the administrative assistant and a referral to the faculty academic committee, which required a meeting at which Huang Wei spoke on her behalf with the measured authority of a man who had made his position clear and was not interested in debating it further. She was enrolled. It was the beginning of November. She had been at Peking University for 8 weeks. She had, on paper, satisfied 2 years of requirements. She sat in her dormitory room that evening, a single room she had requested on enrollment, paying the supplementary fee from money she had been saving since August, when she had identified and begun executing a series of small, careful arbitrage moves in the second-hand textbook market, so buying collections from graduating students who were offloading books quickly before leaving and reselling them through an online platform at the beginning of the semester. And she opened her laptop and began drafting the first of the documents she'd been building towards since April. The document was a preliminary analysis of Linyan Textiles Limited, her father's company, Linyan Jianggo. Her father, who had named his company with the specific vanity of a man who considered his enterprise and his family to be one continuous project, had built Linyan Textiles from a small fabric trading operation in the mid-1990s into a mid-sized company with distribution agreements covering 7 provinces and a modest export operation that serviced buyers in Southeast Asia. By the time of Linyan's original death at 36, the company had been absorbed by Zenith Commercial Holdings in a transaction that had, on its face, been a voluntary merger. Lin Jiangguo had signed the papers himself. He had described it, at the time, as a strategic partnership that would allow the company to scale. What it had actually been was the end of 25 years of his work and the transfer of the assets he had intended to leave to his daughters into the control of a company in which neither of them had any position. The mechanism had taken Linyan the better part of a year of night school study to understand. It had worked as follows. Shen Hao, whom Linyan had been introduced to at 20, had become engaged to at 23, and had been left by at 26, when he had informed her with minimal ceremony that he and Wei Yan had been in a relationship for the previous 14 months, had not simply stolen a fiancé. He had been, from the beginning, the advance team for a corporate acquisition. See, he was a junior director at Zenith Commercial Holdings. His introduction to Linyan had not been, as it had been presented, a family-friend connection. It had been a calculated first step in a process designed to establish trust, extract information about the company's financials and governance structure, and eventually create leverage. The engagement had given Shen Hao access to Linyan's family for 3 years. During those 3 years, he had attended family dinners and company events. He had made himself helpful to Lin Jiangguo on minor matters, had presented himself as a potential future son-in-law with appropriate deference and apparent respect. He had also, quietly and systematically, been reporting back to Zenith's acquisition team. The mechanism had been a variable interest entity structure combined with what Xu Ming's writing described as a governance ambush, a series of small amendments to the company's Articles of Association proposed at shareholders' meetings over the course of 18 months as administrative clarifications that had collectively restructured the decision-making authority in ways that Lin Jiangguo had not fully understood. The amendments had been drafted by a law firm that Shen Hao had recommended to Lin Jiangguo as excellent for small business governance matters. The firm worked for Zenith. By the time Lin Jiangguo understood what had happened, Zenith's holdings company had acquired a blocking stake through a series of transactions that were individually below the disclosure threshold. The merger offer had come after that. The terms had been technically fair market value. There had been no alternative that any competent advisor could have recommended. Lin Yan had been 28 when the merger closed. She had been working at the tenancy disputes firm, making a salary that covered her rent and her night school fees, with approximately 300 yuan left over each month. She had not known about Shen Hao's role until she was 29, and by then there had been nothing to be done except understand it. She sat with her preliminary analysis document open on her laptop and read through what she had written. The first entry in the document was a timeline. It began in this year and extended 8 years forward. She marking every key event in the original acquisition sequence with the date on which it had occurred, the decision maker involved, and the mechanism employed. She had been building this timeline in her memory for 3 days. Writing it down had taken 4 hours. The second section was an asset inventory, the current corporate structure of Linyan Textiles, the ownership breakdown, the existing articles of association, the financing arrangements. The third section was headed Intervention Points and was blank. She closed the laptop, lay back on the narrow dormitory mattress, and looked at the ceiling. This ceiling was white, not pale green, and had no water stains. It was unremarkable. She was 18 years old, 8 weeks into her first year at one of the country's best law programs, and she had already completed the academic equivalent of 2 years. She had approximately 2 years remaining before she would have a law degree, which was faster than anyone expected and still, by her calculations, 1 year too slow for the most critical intervention she needed to make. She sat up, she picked up her laptop again, reopened the document, and began filling in the intervention points section. The first intervention point was not corporate law, it was property law, and it needed to happen before her father's company became a target. The property law situation was this. Lin Jiangwo owned, in addition to his shareholding in the company, 2 commercial properties, a warehouse facility on the outskirts of the city, and a mid-sized office building that the company used as its headquarters. Both properties were titled in his personal name rather than in the company's name, which was a relatively common arrangement among first-generation Chinese entrepreneurs of his era who had acquired assets before they fully understood the distinction between personal and corporate holdings. In Lin Yan's original timeline, when the Zenith transaction had closed, these properties had been excluded from the merger. Technically, correctly, because they were personal assets rather than company assets. However, Zenith's acquisition of the company had included assumption of its lease arrangements, which included a lease from Lin Jiangwo personally to the company for the use of the headquarters building. The lease had been on extremely favorable terms, far below market rate, and had been used by Zenith's advisors post-acquisition as the basis for a related party transaction claim against Lin Jiangwo personally, arguing that the below-market lease represented an improper transfer of value from the company to its majority shareholder. The claim had been settled expensively and had required Lin Jiangwo to sell the office building to cover the settlement costs. The warehouse had been sold separately 2 years later to meet a personal guarantee Lin Jiangwo had provided on the company's debt, a guarantee that had been technically in place from the beginning of the company's operations, but that Zenith had called in selectively at a moment when Lin Jiangwo was least positioned to respond. By the time Lin Yan was 30, her father had no properties. By the time she was 32, he had moved out of the family home, which had been in her mother's name and had therefore survived, into a smaller apartment on the same street, where he had lived with the specific bewildered dignity of a man who did not fully understand how he had lost everything. The intervention point, as Lin Yan had identified it, was the lease agreement. The below-market lease existed because no one had ever reviewed it or adjusted it. It had been set up in 1998 as a practical arrangement when the company was new and the family needed the cash flow to go to operating costs rather than to rent. It had never been formally amended as the company grew, and the market rate for commercial property in that district changed significantly. By the time of the Zenith acquisition, the lease was providing space at approximately 40% below current market rate, which was, as it turned out, a defensible basis for a related party transaction claim. The fix was straightforward. Adjust the lease to market rate, have a licensed appraiser provide a formal valuation, record the amendment with the appropriate district registry. This was a 3-week process if you knew what you were doing and had the right professional connections. Lin Yan did not yet have the professional connections, but she was at Peking University, which had a legal clinic, and the legal clinic took cases. And one of the clinic's practice areas was commercial property, and the clinic was supervised by Professor Li Qing, who was a property law specialist with a long-standing relationship with the 2 best property appraisal firms in the city. She went to see Professor Li Qing in December of her first year. She presented the situation as a theoretical matter initially, a question about the risk profile of informal personal-to-company lease arrangements, where the rate had not been reviewed against market conditions. Professor Li Qing had the specific alertness of a practitioner who recognizes a real situation wearing a hypothetical costume, and she had allowed Lin Yan to drop the theoretical framing after approximately 4 minutes. "This is your family's company," she said. "Oh, yes. And you want to fix the lease before it becomes an issue. Before anyone with an interest in making it an issue has the opportunity to do so." Professor Li Qing looked at her for a moment with the expression that Lin Yan was beginning to recognize as the specific response that experienced practitioners have to a person who understands what they're doing. It was a look that combined respect with a slight wariness. The wariness not of someone who suspects bad intent, but of someone who recognizes that they are in the presence of a person who is already several moves ahead. "The clinic can handle the valuation referral and the amendment documentation," Professor Li said. "As a teaching matter, it's appropriate. The commercial property work is exactly what our students need." "How quickly do you need this done?" "By March." "That's achievable." I'll supervise it personally." Lin Yan thanked her and left. On the walk back across campus to the library, the afternoon air was cold and carried the particular dusty sharpness of a Beijing winter, the kind that settles in the back of your throat. She stopped at a vending machine outside the main library building and bought a small carton of hot barley milk, which she drank standing on the library steps, looking at the campus spread out in front of her. She had been here 3 months. In 3 months, she had satisfied 2 years of curriculum requirements, identified and begun executing the first intervention in a 9-year acquisition sequence, and enrolled in the 2nd and 3rd year courses that would give her the specific tools she needed for the subsequent interventions. She finished the barley milk, dropped the carton in the bin, and went inside to the library. Her 2nd year, which was, on the course enrollment record, her 1st year, say since the credit petition had made year 1 into a formality, was the year she enrolled in Shuming's seminar. The seminar on structural vulnerabilities in closely held company governance was capped at 12 students and selected by application. The application required a writing sample on a topic of the applicant's choice and 2 faculty recommendations. Lin Yan submitted a 12-page analysis of the governance risks created by informal personal-to-company arrangements in family-owned enterprises, drawing on 3 documented cases from the literature, and 1 anonymized case study that was, in its structural details, a very precise description of Lin Yan Textiles Limited. She obtained recommendations from Professor Li Qing and Professor Huang Wei. She was the only first-year student, officially, in terms of standing, though practically she was operating at the 3rd-year level, to be admitted to the seminar. The other 11 students were 3rd and 4th-year undergraduates and 2 master's candidates. Shuming ran the seminar on Tuesday afternoons in a glass-walled room on the 3rd floor of the law faculty building. He was a compact man who dressed with the specific understated precision of someone who has thought about how they present themselves and reached a conclusion they do not revisit frequently. He spoke with the cadence of someone who has organized their thoughts before entering a room, which Lin Yan recognized as a habit of trained practitioners rather than trained academics. He had been both, which was relatively rare, and the combination produced a mode of thinking that she found both familiar and, in its precision, somewhat ahead of anything she had previously encountered. On the 3rd session of the seminar, so he assigned a case study, a fictional scenario built around a family company facing a governance challenge from an outside investor, and asked each student to identify the 3 most critical vulnerabilities in the company's structure. Lin Yan identified 11. The other students identified between 3 and 5. After the session, Shuming stopped her as she was collecting her notes. "Your analysis identified vulnerabilities in the Articles of Association that the case study didn't explicitly flag," he said. "How did you know to look there?" The scenario described an Articles amendment from the prior year as an administrative cleanup, Lin Yan said. Administrative cleanups are where governance ambushes hide. The amendments in the case study, taken individually, looked routine. Taken as a pattern across 18 months, they transferred effective veto authority from the founding shareholder to the board majority without the founding shareholder needing to understand that that was what had happened. Shuming was quiet for a moment. "The scenario was based on a real case," he said. "The analysts who reviewed it at the time identified 3 vulnerabilities. You identified 11. One of the 11 is a vulnerability that I identified when I analyzed the same case last year, and that I have not written about or discussed in any teaching context." Lin Yan said nothing. "Where did you learn to read corporate documents this way?" he said. I read a great deal, Lin Yan said, which was the same thing she had told Huang Wei, and which was true in both cases and incomplete in both cases. Xu Ming looked at her for another moment. Come to my office hours on Friday, he said. She went. The office was small and precise, with books arranged by subject and then by author within subject, which was the arrangement of a person who uses their library as a working tool rather than a display. There was a second chair, a plain wooden chair with no padding, set at an angle to the desk, which she recognized as the chair for office hours visitors rather than the chair for formal meetings, which meant the conversation he wanted to have was intended to be informal. She sat in it and waited. You're completing the third-year curriculum this year? Xu Ming said. Yes. And your plan is to petition for early graduation at the end of the spring semester? Yes. After 2 years of formal enrollment. He looked at her over his own desk, which was arranged with the same precision as his bookshelves. What are you planning to do with the degree? Corporate law practice, Lin Yan said. Closely held company governance and M&A defense. Specifically the area where small and medium enterprises are acquired through mechanisms their founders don't fully understand until after the transaction has closed. Xu Ming was quiet. That's a very specific practice area, he said. Yes. It is also an underserved area. Most firms that practice M&A do acquirer side work. The defense side of transactions below a certain value threshold is poorly resourced. I know. He looked at her for another long moment. I have a research project, he said, on the documentation patterns of governance ambush acquisitions over the last 15 years. I have been looking for a research assistant who can read corporate documents the way you apparently read them. The position pays a modest hourly rate and involves access to a case archive that I do not provide to students who are not directly supervised. Lin Yan said yes. She began the following Monday. The case archive was kept in a locked room adjacent to Xu Ming's office. It contained documentation from 43 acquisition transactions, some completed, some abandoned midway through, in which Xu Ming had been retained as either an expert witness or an independent governance reviewer. As the files ranged from thin, advisory opinions he had provided early in transactions that resolved quickly, to substantial, one file cabinet drawer for a single transaction that had produced 4 years of litigation. Lin Yan spent the first 3 weeks reading every file. She read with the specific quality of attention that a person brings to a problem they have personal stakes in. Not the attention of a researcher cataloging information for external purposes, but the attention of a person who is looking for something they need and do not yet fully know the shape of. She took notes in a small notebook with a red cover. She categorized the patterns she identified, the documentation signatures of governance ambush acquisitions, some the stages at which intervention would have been effective, the legal mechanisms that had and had not worked when targets had attempted defense. On the 19th file, she found the documentation pattern for the Lin Yan Textiles acquisition. Not the actual transaction, Xu Ming's archive predated that, but a transaction with an identical structure, same VIE mechanism, same articles amendment sequence, same personal guarantee enforcement timing. The target company in file 19 had lost. The founder had signed the papers, the transaction had closed. The legal team for the target, reading the post hoc assessment Xu Ming had written, had missed 3 specific intervention opportunities in the 12 months before the merger offer arrived. She knew which 3. She had identified them while reading the file before she had found Xu Ming's assessment at the back. She opened her red notebook and compared her notes against his analysis. They matched on 2 of the 3. On the 3rd, so she had identified something different. A company law provision regarding minority shareholder rights that Xu Ming's assessment had noted was available, but had characterized as unlikely to be effective given the specific facts. Lin Yan believed he was wrong about that characterization based on a case from her original timeline's legal history that would not occur for another 4 years, and therefore was not in any resource he could currently consult. She wrote a 4-page memo on the minority shareholder rights provision, citing the applicable legislation and the existing case law, and constructing the argument for why it would be effective in the specific factual pattern she had identified. She put the memo on Xu Ming's desk with a note that said, regarding file 19, I believe there was a 4th intervention point. He came to find her in the archive room 2 days later. Where did this argument come from? He said. He was holding the memo. The statutory basis is in Section 61 of the company law, as amended, Lin Yan said. The application in the specific factual pattern I identified hasn't been tested in the courts yet, but the textual argument is coherent and the policy basis is strong. I know the statutory basis, I know the textual argument. I wrote a footnote about it in my assessment of File 19 and concluded that no court would apply it to this pattern because there is no precedent. There will be precedent, Lin Yan said. There's a case currently working its way through the commercial courts in Guangdong. I read about it in the Commercial Law Journal last month that has the same structural issues. I believe it will produce the precedent you're describing as absent. Xu Ming looked at her. If the Guangdong case produces that precedent, he said slowly, it would retroactively validate this intervention approach in every subsequent transaction with this structure. Yes, which means the documentation pattern I've identified in File 19 and in 6 other files in this archive would have a viable defense mechanism that currently has no established precedent. Yes. He looked at the memo for another moment. You understand this would be forward-looking legal strategy, based on expected rather than established precedent. In practice, Lin Yan said, the most important work in corporate defense is done before the attack arrives. At the point when the established precedent exists and the defense mechanism is widely known, the acquiring companies will have already adapted around it. The value is in knowing the defense before it becomes common knowledge. Xu Ming set the memo down on the archive table. I'm going to revise my File 19 assessment, he said. And I'm going to include your analysis as a contributing factor, with attribution. Thank you. And I want you to begin a systematic review of all 43 files in this archive for similar unidentified intervention points. This is now a formal research collaboration. I'll adjust your compensation accordingly. He left the archive room. Lin Yan turned back to File 20. The Guangdong case produced its precedent in the spring of Lin Yan's second formal year of enrollment, the year that was, in terms of her actual academic progress, her third and final year. The decision came down in April, on a Thursday, and it was cited in the commercial law journals the following week. Lin Yan read the citation in the library and felt a specific quiet satisfaction that had nothing to do with being right and everything to do with timing. She had 3 months left before she would petition for early graduation. She had, by this point, completed all remaining examinable coursework and was in the final stage of her supervised research collaboration with Xu Ming, which had produced 2 co-authored papers and a case study that Xu Ming had indicated he intended to incorporate into the next edition of his textbook. She had also, over the course of those 2 years, executed 6 of the 9 intervention points she had identified for Lin Yan Textiles. The lease had been adjusted to market rate and formally recorded in January of her first year, with the amended documentation handled by Professor Li Qing's clinic. The Articles of Association had been reviewed and revised in a process that Lin Yan had managed largely remotely. She had drafted the proposed amendments herself, reviewed them with Xu Ming under the cover of a hypothetical research scenario, and presented them to her father through the intermediary of a company law specialist she had identified and briefed. Her father had accepted the amendments with some initial resistance. He did not at first understand why administrative changes to documents that had worked well for 20 years were necessary, but had eventually deferred to the specialist's professional opinion. The personal guarantees had been restructured. The ownership structure had been amended to include a family trust, which had required a separate engagement with an estate law specialist and a more complicated conversation with her mother, who had been resistant to the concept of a formal legal structure governing family assets. Lin Yan had sat with her mother for 3 evenings over the course of 2 weeks, explaining the structure patiently and without evident urgency, framing it as ordinary, prudent planning rather than emergency response to a specific threat. By the end of the 3rd evening, her mother had agreed. The remaining 3 intervention points required the Guangdong precedent. Now that it existed, she could execute them. She worked through them in May, with Xu Ming's research archive as reference and the professional network she had built over 2 years as operational resource. The work was not dramatic. It was documentarian. It involved reading agreements and identifying provisions and drafting amendments and having conversations with people who had professional expertise in specific narrow areas. It was the work of someone who understood what they were doing and was doing it carefully, without shortcuts. When she was done, Linyan Textiles Limited was, from a governance and structural standpoint, a meaningfully different company than it had been 3 years before. Not visibly different. Its operations were the same, its staff were the same, its customers and suppliers were the same, but the specific vulnerabilities that Zenith Commercial Holdings had identified and planned to exploit, and that, in another year or two, someone from Zenith would approach her father about, were no longer there. The governance ambush depended on those vulnerabilities, the way a key depends on the cut of a lock. The lock had been recut. She graduated in June. The early graduation petition had been approved after a formal review by the Faculty Academic Committee, with written support from Huang Wei, Li Qing, and Xu Ming. The committee had approved it with a notation in the record that characterized her academic trajectory as exceptional and without precedent in the faculty's recorded history. She did not attend the graduation ceremony, which was scheduled for first-year students who were completing the standard 4-year program. Her degree was delivered by the academic registrar's office in an envelope that she picked up on a Tuesday morning between other errands. She sat with the envelope in the university cafe, bought a cup of coffee with extra milk. The good coffee from the new machine on the second floor, rather than the cheap coffee from the vending machine that students used between classes, and opened it. The degree was printed on heavy cream-colored paper, her name in the formal typeface. She looked at it for 30 seconds, then folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope, and tucked the envelope into her bag. She had a meeting at 3 o'clock with a partner at a firm that specialized in M&A defense work. The partner was a contact Xu Ming had referred to her. She had submitted her resume the previous week. The meeting was an interview, structured as a preliminary conversation, which in practice meant that the offer, if one was made, would come at the end of the meeting rather than after it. She finished her coffee and left the cafe. The street outside the university's main gate was busy in the specific way of Thursday middays. The lunch crowd from the surrounding office buildings and research institutes mixed with students on the late end of their morning schedules. The food carts doing steady business. Someone selling newspapers from a folding table set slightly too far into the pedestrian lane so that people navigated around it without thinking. The air was warm. The light had the mild flatness of a cloudy June afternoon in Beijing. She took the subway rather than a taxi. The subway was faster, which mattered, and the 45 minutes in transit gave her time to run through the preparation she had been doing all week. Wei Yan called her while she was in the subway station waiting for the train. Lin Yan looked at the phone screen. She had Wei Yan's number saved. They had been in routine family contact throughout her university years, which had been somewhat easier to manage than she had expected, possibly because the specific calculus between them had shifted in small ways, without the textbook incident, without the particular success by sabotage that had structured their original dynamic. Wei Yan had been not different exactly, the same person, but a person operating without the specific advantage she had been counting on, and so the strategic positioning between them had operated differently, neither of them openly acknowledging any of this. She let the call go to voicemail. The train arrived. She got on. At the next station, she checked the voicemail. Wei Yan's voice on the recording was pleasant, slightly formal, the tone of someone who is performing a routine check-in and wants the performance to read as natural. She said she had heard Lin Yan was graduating and was just calling to congratulate her. And was she coming home this weekend, and their mother wanted to know if she was. Lin Yan put the phone in her bag. Shen Hao had entered Wei Yan's life, in this timeline, as in the original, approximately 8 months ago. He had been introduced at a family dinner that Lin Yan had not attended. Being in the middle of examination period and having made a considered decision not to be present at social occasions involving people she did not know who had been connected to the family through channels she could not immediately verify. Her father had mentioned him in a subsequent phone call as a young man Wei Yan met through the industry association. Her mother had mentioned him more extensively, as mothers tend to. Lin Yan had looked him up. He was, and as he had been in the original timeline, a junior director at Zenith Commercial Holdings. He was 24, presentable in photographs, and had a professional profile that was carefully neutral about specifics. She had not made any direct move on the Shen Hao situation. Not yet. The corporate interventions had been the priority, and they were complete. What remained was less urgent and required different tools. The meeting at 3 o'clock lasted 90 minutes. The partner's name was Zhou Fang. She was 42, had short hair, and wore the specific kind of quiet tailoring that signals that the person wearing it has spent enough time in rooms where other people were expensively dressed to have arrived at a considered aesthetic that was neither in competition with that nor indifferent to it. She asked good questions. Lin Yan answered them directly. At the end of 90 minutes, Zhou Feng made an offer. It was an entry-level position, which was appropriate for a new graduate, but it was structured with an unusually compressed advancement track. The explanation for the structure, which Zhou Feng did not offer explicitly but which Lin Yan understood, was that Xuming had described her in terms that created an expectation of advancement, and the firm was structuring the initial offer to reflect that expectation while retaining the standard protections of a probationary period. She accepted. She took the subway home to the apartment she had been renting for the last year, a small second-floor unit in a building 6 minutes' walk from the university that she had chosen for its lease terms, 2-year fixed rate with renewal option, which was a better deal than any of the other units she had reviewed, and its proximity to a good noodle place that was open until 1 in the morning. The apartment had one room and a kitchen alcove and a window that faced west and received the late afternoon light in a way that made the room feel larger than it was. She made tea and sat at the small table by the window and opened her laptop. The document she had been building for 3 years was in a folder titled Lit Analysis, an abbreviation she had chosen precisely because it did not fully spell out the company name, a habit of notation she had developed during her research work with Xu Ming, who kept all case archive documents in a similar partially anonymized format. The document was 94 pages long now, not counting the exhibits. She opened the section headed Remaining Items. There were 2. The first was labeled Shenhao, Zenith Connection, and contained a 2-paragraph summary of what she knew and a bullet list of the documentary evidence she would need to make the connection explicit, demonstrable, and usable. The second was labeled Wei Yan and contained a single sentence. The question is not whether to address this, but when and with what instrument. She read both sections. Then she closed the document and looked out the window at the west-facing late afternoon light, which had gone the particular gold of 6 o'clock in June, the kind of light that makes cheap tables and plain white walls look better than they are. She thought about her father. Not the 36-year-old Lin Yan's father, which was to say the man who had spent his final years trying to maintain dignity in a smaller apartment, who had retreated slowly from the precise and optimistic builder he had been into something diminished and bewildered. She thought about the man who existed now, the man who had, over the last 3 years, I had small conversations with her about the company's governance documents without fully understanding that those conversations were part of a protection effort, who had mentioned Shenhao with the comfortable tone of a father who believes his younger daughter has made a reasonable match, who had called her last week with some news about a distribution expansion that he was plainly proud of. The instrument she needed for the Shenhao situation was not a dramatic one. It did not require confrontation, it required documentation. She opened a second document, a clean one, and began to draft an inquiry request to a commercial due diligence firm that she had identified 3 months ago as the best in the city for this type of work. The inquiry described, in general terms, a request for background and affiliation research on a named individual, including corporate directorship history, related party relationships, and employment trajectory. It was precise, professional, and would produce exactly the documentary change she needed within 3 to 4 weeks. She wrote the inquiry and saved it. She would send it tomorrow from the firm's email address, using the firm's engaged client protocol, which would ensure that the due diligence firm treated the inquiry with appropriate professional seriousness and discretion. She made a second cup of tea. The light outside the window had shifted from gold to something cooler, and the noodle place on the corner had turned on its sign, which was visible from her window. Orange characters against white, the particular color that she associated with late evenings and the end of productive days. She thought about Wei Yan. The question of Wei Yan was the one she had been the most deliberate about. It was also, she recognized, the most complicated, because the question was not simply what Wei Yan had done, but what Wei Yan was. In the original timeline, Wei Yan had spent her life being the architect of small strategic removals, things taken, opportunities redirected, advantages accumulated through the precise and deniable extraction of other people's resources. The textbooks had been the most economically consequential single action, but they had not been an aberration. They had been a characteristic move. In this timeline, Wei Yan had not taken the textbooks. Lin Yan had made that impossible with a single word. Without that success, without the specific experience of having executed a sabotage that worked and produced a favorable outcome, Wei Yan's strategic behavior had not, as far as Lin Yan could observe, been corrected. It had simply not been confirmed. The same person was in there. The same calculus. It was simply operating without the anchor of a demonstrated result. Shen Hao was, in this timeline, Wei Yan's relationship of approximately 8 months. He had been, in the original timeline, Lin Yan's fiancé of 3 years. The mechanism by which that had shifted, the gradual, careful establishment of trust, followed by the precise extraction of what he needed, was something he had presumably not yet run through its full cycle in this timeline because Lin Yan had not been the initial target. She wondered, not for the first time, whether Shen Hao had been selected for Wei Yan or had found her independently. The strategic logic was either equally good. A relationship with the founder's daughter was a relationship with the company. It didn't especially matter which daughter. What mattered was the documentation. The due diligence report came back in 18 days. She read it on a Saturday morning in the same chair by the west-facing window, with coffee rather than tea because she had made the coffee first and then forgotten to also make the tea. The report was 42 pages. It was organized into sections covering corporate affiliations, employment history, financial interests, and related party relationships. On page 11, there was a section titled Corporate Affiliations, Undisclosed. Shen Hao was a director of Zenith Commercial Holdings acquisition subsidiary. This was not the same as being a director of Zenith itself, and the acquisition subsidiary's name was Haojung Capital Management, which bore no obvious lexical relationship to Zenith. Which was one reason it had not shown up in the initial public records search. Haojung Capital Management held, as the report noted in a footnote with the slightly careful tone of a due diligence firm being precise, a declared interest in the textile and materials distribution sector of the market in which Lin Yan Textiles operated. The declared interest had been filed with the relevant commercial registry in a document dated 4 months ago. 3 months after Shen Hao had first met Wei Yan at the Industry Association dinner, Lin Yan read the footnote twice. She flipped to the appendix, which contained the registry documents as exhibits. She read them carefully. The declared interest language was general. Strategic interest in the acquisition of operating businesses in the textile distribution sector, specifically in the Eastern market region, but specific enough, combined with Shen Hao's director status and the timeline. To constitute, if not legal evidence of a planned acquisition, at least a very comprehensive basis for a disclosure conversation. She set the report down on the table. She looked at the orange sign from the noodle place, which was not yet lit at this hour. It was 9 in the morning, but whose shape she had memorized from its lit-up version and could trace in the morning's plain daylight. She picked up her phone and called her father. He answered on the 3rd ring, with the slightly startled tone of a man who is used to receiving calls from his daughter in the early evening rather than the early morning. "Lin Yan, is everything all right?" "Everything is fine," she said. "I'm sorry to call early. I have something I need to discuss with you. It's about the company. Not an emergency, but it's important that we speak before the end of the week, preferably." A pause. Her father processed in that particular way he had. A pause that contained the working through rather than the hesitation. "Of course. Should I come to Beijing?" "I'll come to you," she said. "I can come Sunday." "All right. I'll tell your mother." "Don't mention what we're discussing," Lin Yan said. "I'll explain when I arrive. Just tell her I'm coming for a visit." Another pause, longer this time. "Lin Yan, what is this about?" "I'll explain everything on Sunday," she said. "I promise." "Wei, how are you?" He said he was fine. The distribution expansion was going well. The new warehouse facility was almost fully operational. She listened to this with the full attention she always gave to news about the company. The attention of someone who knows precisely how valuable this thing is and has spent 3 years ensuring it would still be there to be valued. She said she was glad. She said she would see him Sunday. She ended the call. She finished her coffee, which had gone lukewarm. She did not mind lukewarm coffee. She had been drinking it at whatever temperature it happened to be for most of her adult life. First from habit when she was busy, and later from the kind of indifference to minor inconveniences that accumulates in a person over years of managing things that actually matter. She opened her laptop and began preparing the Sunday conversation. The conversation would take, she estimated, approximately 3 hours. She would cover 3 things: the Shenhao connection to Zenith Commercial Holdings, the governance changes she had been making over the last 3 years, and why they had been necessary, and the response strategy going forward. The third thing was the most important and the most detailed. She had been building it for 3 years, but had not yet presented it to her father in full. Partly because the full presentation had required waiting for the Guangdong precedent and the due diligence report before it could be complete. It was complete now. The strategy did not involve litigation because litigation was expensive, slow, and uncertain. And because the best outcome of litigation was the prevention of something that could be prevented more cleanly through structural means. It did not involve a dramatic revelation or confrontation, because those served narrative purposes rather than practical ones. It involved 3 corporate law mechanisms and 1 estate law mechanism, already partially executed over the preceding 3 years, that collectively made Linyan Textiles structurally impervious to the acquisition approach Zenith had been planning. The final piece, the piece she had not yet told her father, was the creation of a formal board governance structure. A small board, 3 members, with an independent director whose appointment would be governed by a provision in the articles that made unilateral removal by any single shareholder impossible. The independent director she had in mind was a retired commercial court judge with an impeccable professional reputation and no connections to either Zenith or any of its affiliated entities. She had spoken to the judge's assistant 3 weeks ago. The judge was interested, pending a formal review of the company's governance documents, which she would bring on Sunday. Linyan saved the preparation document, closed the laptop, and stood up. She needed to pack a bag. Sunday was 2 days away, and there was work to do before then. She had a caseload to manage at the firm, a memo to finish for Zhou Fang, and a call with Xu Ming on Monday morning that she needed to be prepared for. The Sunday conversation was important, but it was a scheduled piece of a larger sequence, and the larger sequence ran on a timetable she had been maintaining for 3 years. She pulled a bag from the closet and began, efficiently and without drama, to pack it. Her mother cried when she arrived on Sunday. This was not unusual. Her mother had cried at most of Linyan's arrivals for the last 2 years, which Linyan understood to be a response to the general fact of Linyan's adult independence rather than any specific circumstance. Her mother had expected, on some level she probably could not fully articulate, that Linyan would follow the standard path. 4-year university, graduation, a job in the city, eventual engagement, eventual return to the general proximity of the family home. The path Linyan had taken, the compressed degree, the early graduation, the firm in Beijing, had produced a daughter who was more professionally substantial and more geographically distant than the baseline expectation. And her mother mourned the gap between expectation and reality in the way she mourned most things. Quietly, with cooking, and with small expressions of feeling at arrivals and departures. Linyan accepted the embrace and said it was good to be home, and meant it, in the specific, limited way in which it was true. The house smelled of the cumin lamb her mother made for important occasions. The living room had been rearranged slightly since her last visit. A new lamp on the bookshelf. The television moved 4 degrees to the left. Small changes, the consistency underneath them. Wei Yun was not home. She had, her mother explained, a prior engagement with Shen Hao, which she mentioned with the particular warmth of a mother describing something she has approved of. Linyan nodded and said that was fine and went to find her father. He was in the study, a small room at the back of the house that contained his desk, his filing cabinet, and a bookshelf of industry directories and business management texts from the 1990s that he had never got around to replacing with more current versions. He was looking at a document when she knocked on the open door, and he set it face down on the desk before standing to greet her, which told her the document was something he was uncertain about. She looked at it as she sat down. "What is that?" she said. He hesitated for a moment, the hesitation of a person deciding how much to disclose, and then turned it over and slid it across the desk to her. It was a letter on commercial stationery. The letter had said Haojeng Capital Management. She read it. It was a preliminary letter of interest, framed as an invitation to explore potential areas of strategic collaboration between Haojeng Capital Management and Linyan Textiles Limited. It was dated 5 days ago. It was the opening move. "When did this arrive?" Linyan said. "Thursday. I was going to mention it to you. It seemed like the kind of thing you might have a view on. Shenhao mentioned that Haojeng was active in the sector. He actually suggested this might be a good opportunity to consider." "Of course he did," Lin Yan said. Her father looked at her. His expression shifted into the specific attention he gave to things she said that he did not immediately understand but had learned. "Over the course of several years of conversations about the company to take seriously, you know something about Haojeng." "I know exactly what Haojeng is," Lin Yan said. She opened her bag and took out the due diligence report, the governance documents, and the prepared materials for the Sunday conversation. She placed them on the desk in 3 stacks. The report on Shenhao, the company governance documentation, and the board structure proposal. This is going to take about 3 hours. I'm going to explain all of it from the beginning. I need you to listen and not make any decisions until I've finished." He looked at the 3 stacks. "All right," he said. She began. She explained the governance ambush mechanism first, using the Shuming framework and the File 19 documentation pattern as reference. She kept the explanation clear and sequential, without analogies or simplifications. Because her father was an intelligent man who had built a successful business and who deserved to have complex things explained to him correctly rather than at reduced resolution. He listened without interrupting. He asked 3 questions, each of which demonstrated that he had followed the preceding explanation closely and was engaging with its logic rather than its narrative. She explained the changes she had made over the preceding 3 years, the lease amendment, the articles revision, the trust structure, the personal guarantee restructuring. She explained each one in terms of the specific vulnerability it addressed and the specific mechanism of attack it foreclosed. She did not soften the implication that without these changes, the attack would have succeeded. Her father was quiet for a while after this section. "You've been managing this for 3 years, he said. "Without telling me?" "I told you about each change as it was being made," Lin Yan said. I explained the reasons for each change. You told me they were prudent administrative updates. They were prudent administrative updates. They were also targeted defensive interventions. Both things were true." He looked at the stack of governance documents. His expression was complicated. Not anger. Exactly. Something more like the feeling a person has when they realize they have been standing near an edge without knowing it, which produces a retroactive vertigo that is the fear you did not experience at the time. "Why didn't you tell me the full picture?" he said. "Because if I had told you the full picture," Lin Yan said, "you would have confronted the situation directly. And a direct confrontation, at the point when the attack was not yet fully in progress, would have been both premature and unnecessary. It would also have alerted Zenith that we knew what they were doing, which would have caused them to adapt their approach." Her father was quiet for another moment. "Shenhao," he said. "Wei Yan. Shenhao is doing his job," Lin Yan said. "He's doing it well. He identified this company as a target, established a personal connection to give him access to information about our governance structure, and has been reporting back to Zenith's acquisition team. The Haojeng letter is the formal opening. It's the point at which the approach goes from covert intelligence gathering to active acquisition process. And Wei Yan? Wei Yan doesn't know what Shenhao is," Lin Yan said. "She's involved with him because he is what he presents as. She doesn't know he's working for an acquiring firm." She said this because she believed it was true. In the original timeline, Wei Yan had not known either. She had, in fact, been surprised and bewildered when the full picture eventually became clear, and had reacted with the specific confusion of someone who understood that they had been used without quite understanding how. She was not, in this reading, a co-conspirator. She was a person who had chosen to be with someone because it served a certain set of personal interests, the prestige of his presentation, the access his connections provided, without performing adequate due diligence on what he actually was. Lin Yan set the Shenhao due diligence report on top of the governance stack and slid both across the desk. "Read the report," she said. "Then we'll talk about the board structure proposal." He read for 25 minutes. His reading pace was deliberate, not slow but thorough, with occasional pauses where he reread something or set the report down to look at the wall. When he finished, he placed the report on the desk with the particular care people use with things that have weight. "What do I do with this?" he said. The letter from Hao Zheng requires a response. The appropriate response is a politely worded non-engagement. "We are not currently considering strategic partnerships. We will reach out if our position changes. This should be sent through the company's legal advisor, not personally. I have drafted the response." And Shen Hao? The appropriate response to Shen Hao is documentation and distance. You do not confront him. You do not disclose that you know his affiliation. You simply stop providing access. This will require a conversation with your mother, who will require an explanation. She paused. And it will require a conversation with Wei Yan. Her father looked at her. "You should be the one to speak with Wei Yan." "I know," Lin Yan said. "She won't take it well." "No. She's been very involved with him for 8 months. She talks about him." "I know," Lin Yan said again. The same flat words she had said to Wei Yan in the bedroom doorway 4 years ago. Not unkind, not apologetic, just the word itself. Her father looked at the window for a long moment. Outside, the afternoon had the quality of late autumn Sundays. The light pressing down flat and gray, the garden her mother maintained visible through the glass, the persimmon tree with 2 remaining fruits that had been there since Lin Yan's childhood and was older than her. "She's not a bad person," he said, about Wei Yan. "I know she's not," Lin Yan said. She meant this. It was possible to understand someone precisely, to see the full architecture of their strategic behavior, and still not characterize them simply as bad. Wei Yan was a person who operated by a certain logic, a logic that prioritized her own advancement through the careful management of other people's positions. It was not a virtuous logic, but it was not in the moral taxonomy that mattered to Lin Yan, the same as Shen Hao's logic, which was transactional in a way that had a specifically colder quality. "She took your textbooks," her father said. Lin Yan looked at him. It was the first time he had said this directly, the first time, in this timeline or any other, that he had named the specific thing Wei Yan had done. She had not known he knew. She had assumed the incident had not registered with him, or had been framed to him by her mother as a simple borrowing, a minor inconvenience. "Yes," she said. "Oh, I knew at the time," he said. "Your mother told me it was an overreaction on your part. I let it go." He was looking at the persimmon tree. "I think I understood on some level that it wasn't simply borrowing, but it was easier to believe your mother's framing." Lin Yan said nothing. "Your score was lower than you expected," he said. "A 598. And this time, 706, she said. He looked at her then, directly, with the expression of a man doing a calculation whose answer he has already arrived at and is simply confirming. "You knew," he said. "You've known this whole time what she was doing, and you've been... What have you been doing?" "Making sure it didn't matter," Lin Yan said. The room was quiet for a moment. Her father nodded once, slowly, the way people nod when they are accepting something they cannot change and have decided not to resist. "All right," he said. "Show me the board structure proposal." She showed him. He asked good questions. He approved the independent director appointment. He signed the authorization for the legal response to the Hao Jing letter. When they were done, her mother called them for dinner, and they went. The dinner was the cumin lamb with rice and 3 side dishes her mother had been preparing since morning. Wei Yan arrived 20 minutes after them, apologizing for being late with the practiced ease of someone who does not find lateness particularly apologetic. She sat across from Lin Yan, served herself, and said congratulations on the graduation and the new position in a tone that was correct in all its surface elements. Lin Yan thanked her. They ate. Their father asked about the firm. Lin Yan described the practice area and the current case she was working on in general terms that were accurate and undetailed. Their mother talked about the neighbors. Wei Yan mentioned Shen Hao by name twice in the natural flow of conversation, the way people mention people they are embedded with, using his name as a shorthand for a set of experiences and references that she expected her family to receive as familiar. Each time the name was mentioned, Lin Yan's father's expression remained neutral, with the steady quality of someone who has decided in advance precisely how to manage this. After dinner, while their mother was in the kitchen and their father had retreated briefly to the study, Lin Yan and Wei Yan sat in the living room with their tea. The lamp on the bookshelf cast the room in warm, dim light. Outside, it was dark. "You look tired," Wei Yan said, an observation, not a concern. "I've been working a great deal," Lin Yan said. "At the firm?" "Yes." A pause. Wei Yan turned her teacup in her hands. "Are you happy with it? The firm? The position?" "Yes." "It's impressive," Wei Yan said, "graduating so quickly. I don't think I would have been able to do that." She said this with the specific flatness of something that is being said because it is the appropriate thing to say, not because it carries genuine weight. "You have different skills," Lin Yan said. Wei Yan looked at her. The look had a specific quality, a brief scanning quality, as if she were checking the statement for irony or concealed meaning. Lin Yan's expression was neutral, which was either reassuring or more unsettling, and Wei Yan apparently decided on reassured, because she turned back to her tea. "Shen Hao thinks very highly of you," Wei Yan said. "He mentioned he'd heard of your work, through some business connection. He said you were doing well." "How kind of him," Lin Yan said, another pause. "He's planning to propose," Wei Yan said. The words came out with a specific quality, the quality of someone who has been holding them and has decided to release them into the room, testing the temperature. "At New Year's. He told me last week." Lin Yan looked at her sister. Wei Yan's expression was a compound one, pride, and underneath the pride something that might have been uncertainty if Lin Yan had not known exactly what it was. It was the look of someone who has acquired something they wanted and is still monitoring whether the acquisition is secure. "I see," Lin Yan said. "I wanted to tell you before he said anything to Baba." A beat. "I know we've only been together 8 months. It's fast, but I believe in him." Lin Yan set her teacup down on the table. She looked at her sister for a long moment, with the same expression she had once given Wei Yan in a bedroom doorway 4 years ago. In a world that did not exist anymore, the expression of a person completing an assessment, finding it accurate, and deciding what to do with the result. "Wei Yan," she said, "before he says anything to Baba, there are some things you should know about Shen Hao's professional affiliations." She reached into her bag and pulled out the summary document she had prepared, not the full 42-page report which she had left with her father, but the 4-page summary she had written for exactly this conversation. She set it on the table between them. "Read this." Wei Yan looked at the document. Then she looked at Lin Yan. "What is this?" "Read it," Lin Yan said, "and then we can talk." Wei Yan picked up the document. The lamp cast the room in the same warm, dim light. Outside, the persimmon tree was invisible in the dark. In the kitchen, their mother was washing dishes, and the sound of water running was consistent and distant. The way background sounds are when something is happening in the foreground that demands all available attention. Wei Yan read. Lin Yan picked up her tea and drank it slowly, looking at the lamp. She was 20 years old. She had a law degree. She was 3 days into a position at a firm that specialized in the work she intended to do for the rest of her professional life. The company her father had spent 25 years building was, for the first time in 4 years, genuinely protected, not through the impermanent protection of good luck or inattention on the acquirer's part, but through the durable, documented, legally defensible protection of a governance structure that had been specifically designed to foreclose the attack that had been coming. Wei Yan set the document down. Her expression had gone through several changes while she was reading. Now it was at the end of that sequence. A stillness that was not peace, but was rather the stillness that follows the movement of something significant. "Where did you get this?" she said. "A professional due diligence firm," Lin Yan said. "It's a standard background report." "You had him investigated." "I had his professional affiliations documented." Wei Yan was quiet for a moment. Her hands on the document were very still. "He's connected to an acquisition company," she said. "Well, that's looking at Baba's company." "He's a director," Lin Yan said. "The relationship was established before he met you. The letter arrived 5 days ago." The silence in the room had the specific quality of a silence that is processing rather than resting. Wei Yan's face had the look of someone doing a calculation they don't want to be doing. He might not have known, she said. The relationship between the acquisition company and Baba's company might have. It might have happened without him knowing about it, without it being the reason. He submitted the Haojung interest registration with the commercial registry 4 months ago, Lin Yan said. The registration specifically names the textile distribution sector. 3 months after he met you? Wei Yan looked at her. I'm not telling you this to tell you what to do, Lin Yan said. That's your decision. But you asked me whether I was happy with the firm, whether I was happy with my work. This is the work I do. This is what I look for. She stood up, picked up her bag, and went to look for her father to say goodnight. Behind her, she heard Wei Yan turn over the summary document and begin apparently to read it again, as if reading it a second time would produce a different result. It would not produce a different result. The facts were the facts. The non-engagement letter was sent to Haojung Capital Management on Tuesday on the company's new letterhead through the commercial law firm that Lin Yan had arranged as the company's formal legal advisor. The letter was 5 sentences long, politely worded, and closed every door that had been offered. On Thursday, Xu Ming called. The Guangdong precedent is being cited in a second instance case in Jiangsu, he said. The pattern is exactly the one you identified in your memo. The defense is using your intervention approach. Successfully, Lin Yan said. Still pending, but the judge has allowed the argument, which means the intervention point you identified is now being tested in an active case. Good, Lin Yan said. I want to expand the research collaboration, Xu Ming said, formally. I'm building a client advisory practice specifically focused on defense work for closely held companies. I want you to be the lead associate on M&A defense matters. I'm committed to the firm for another year, Lin Yan said. I know. I've spoken to Zhou Feng. She's amenable to a secondment arrangement for specific advisory engagements. She thinks it's good for your development, which is correct. A pause in which Lin Yan recognized the measured quality of a person who has organized an argument before delivering it. And I think, given your particular set of skills, so that a practice built around defense work for targets in your specific value range is exactly what this sector needs and currently doesn't have. I know, Lin Yan said. You've been thinking about this already. For a while. Outside the office window, she was at her desk at the firm, the morning light flat and gray through the northeast-facing glass. The city was doing its ordinary city things. Traffic below, the particular sound of urban transit, the visual noise of buildings and sky, and the infrastructure of a large city going about its reliable business. She thought about the 43 files in Xu Ming's archive, the families behind them, the founders who had not understood what was happening to them until after it had already happened, the companies that had been absorbed without the people who built them ever knowing the name of the mechanism. She thought about Lin Jiangwo, 25 years ago, starting a fabric trading operation with the specific optimistic practicality of a man who believes that work and intelligence are sufficient to protect what you build. They are not sufficient. Alone, they are not sufficient. What they need to be sufficient is someone who knows the shape of the attack before it arrives. Tell me more about this secondment arrangement, she said. Xu Ming told her. She listened, making notes in the small red notebook she carried everywhere, which was on its 3rd volume now, the first 2 filled with the research notes, case analyses, and intervention strategies that had been the working documents of the last 3 years. The morning light shifted slightly as a cloud moved. The city continued its reliable business outside the window. She closed the notebook, uncapped her pen, and opened it again to a blank page.